I'm Shekinnah, Youth Voice and Engagement Coordinator at NCS.
My name is Rachael. I am the co-chair of NCS's Youth Advisory Board and Youth Advisor on their Royal Charter Body Board.
I'm Jess. I'm also one of the youth advisors to the Royal Charter Body Board and co-chair of our Youth Advisory Board.
And I'm Michael, and I am the CEO of NCS.
Amazing. I want you guys to, in 3 words, describe what does youth governance mean to you?
Ooh, I would say confidence, action, and accountability.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, Jess?
I would say dual impact, innovation, and value.
Nice.
I would say rare, important, and probably repeating what I think Jess said, impactful.
Nice. I'm loving your words. But for anyone that's listening, what is youth governance if you had to describe it in a phrase or something?
I would say empowering young people to be in those decision-making process, to be a part of that decision, not just being in the rooms, but actually influencing and being able to track their input across decision making in different sectors. Doesn't just have to be in the youth sector, can be across many different sectors.
Amazing. Just bouncing off that, why shouldn't it just be in the youth sector?
Because young people are everywhere. Young people they literally use everything. I think people forget that young people don't just use youth services, they use literally all different services as normal people do. So their voice should be considered in those spaces as well.
Amazing. And just bouncing off what Rachael said, just why do you think it's important then?
So I think particularly for organisations where young people are one of your main users or customers, it really demonstrates that you're considering their voice in what you're designing. Ultimately, it helps you to create user-centred design approaches and therefore deliver greater impact. But I think it also demonstrates that you really value young people as people and value their contributions, which I think adds some credibility to you as an organisation where young people are really central. And I think ultimately bringing lots of different people in, no matter whether they're young people or people who just wouldn't traditionally be in governance spaces, adds to that diversity of thought. And ultimately diversity of thought breeds better decision making. So yeah, and I suppose the final thought is that it really connects your staff at all levels to your user group. Again, particularly where young people are central to the work that you're doing. And I think that really helps to showcase how much you value it and also increase staff's willingness to work hard and get them to see the value that they're making.
Yeah, nice. And you mentioned connecting staff to young people to different levels of decision making. I'm gonna go to Michael. What does youth governance look like? What would it look like if it was to be done well?
I can answer in terms of what I've seen at NCS. I think it's I don't know if it's done. I think it's done well, but maybe it's not best.
Okay.
Could be better. That's why we did an audit. That's why we wanted to try and improve it. I think it's one of the important things. I think done well, you need to be able to clearly identify who they are, what they do, make sure they have, their capacity is built in terms of that they are confident, that they're set up properly, they are introduced, everyone's aware of their role, understands where they fit in. And that you also, I think, acknowledge, certainly for our case, that they can't be in everything. Not everything makes sense, but where they are, it needs to be real involvement, not just tokenistic. So having a young person in the room doth not make youth governance. Having decisions that are particularly handed over to, or examples where you can point to it being listened to, I think is where you start to see that youth governance is actually, or youth in governance is actually happening within an organisation.
Yeah. That's amazing. And then we have our co-chairs that are here. So you guys are co-chairs of the youth board, but then you're also advisors to the Royal Charter Body Board. For some people, it's the longest title in the world. Can you just break it down and what do you actually do?
Maybe we can take half and half.
Yeah,
that would make more sense. I can take the co-chair of the Youth Advisory Board. So we have 12 amazing young people. Some of them have done NCS, some of them haven't done NCS, and they're between the ages of 18 to 21. And essentially they help NCS improve their program, but then also hold the trust accountable in other things. Our programs aren't the only way we interact with young people. We have a youth ambassadors program as well for young people who have just finished NCS as well. But essentially the board serve as a representative group that can guide us towards bettering NCS and learning. Since they have done NCS and some haven't, we can learn how to improve the program, how to make it better, etc. But there's also other things we do, some cross collaboration things of like other organizations in the sector of the Youth Advisory Board. And Jess and I, as co-chairs of that board, we do YAB meetings. We were even involved, and like previous co-chairs were involved in even like the function of the board, so how it was even built up, like the governance of the board itself. And what it really empowers us to do is that when Jess will go on to speak about it, when Jess and I go to Royal Charter Body Board meetings, we don't have that knowledge, because we're not just speaking as Jess and Rachel, we're speaking as Jess and Rachel of 12 other people who also have kind of like a breadth of like experience, lived experience, just different insights, and we then bring that to the board. So the board aren't just kind of like hearing us as those kind of like sole people, they're hearing a collective of views summarized in like 2 people, which is really cool.
Yeah, so as Rachel mentioned, we then also go to Royal Charter Body Board meetings. So like, to translate it into other charity settings, like your board of trustees or your board of directors. And we attend all of those meetings just as regular board members would. And I think that's what makes it quite a special role, is that actually you're not only being consulted when it's like a youth related issue, that there are actively young people involved in sort of all the decisions that the organisation is making at that sort of board level. So we attend those meetings, we read all the papers, and we particularly bring in the voices and perspectives of young people, our youth advisory board and the other young people that we meet as part of our work. But we also just bring a bit of a sort of fresh perspective and sort of constructive criticism, like play a bit of a critical friend role to really highlight like where there might be things that we think the organisation could be doing differently or better, and also to celebrate where we think they're doing things really well, because that's equally important. So providing some sort of support and challenge to the executive team, and also sort of bringing new ideas and perspectives into that space. We don't just attend those meetings, we also sit on the subcommittees of the board. So I attended the Safeguarding Committee for a period of time, and then the Audit and Risk Committee or Finance Committee. And then, so we're also feeding into those spaces, not only the youth sort of agenda items, but that said, there is sort of a standing youth item on the agenda. So we will lead on that item to make sure that we're really bringing young people's voices into the room from the very start of the meeting. Boards are busy places and there's lots of things to discuss, so it can be quite easy to get sidetracked by other agenda items. So really sort of spotlighting young people's voices at the start, and giving the board a bit of a progress update on where we're up to. Ultimately, the board and the organisation invest a lot in our youth voice mechanisms, so it's only right that we do some sort of standard updating on progress and metrics, and how our young people are really making a tangible difference to the organisation.
Yeah, I love your last sentence, how young people are making a tangible difference to the organisation, because people might hear this and be like, oh, it's a youth board. Okay, let's just create a youth board and that's it. Like, it's a tick box that they've done. It's like, we have a youth board, we're doing youth governance. But I'm going to go start with Michael, then I open it up to you guys. What's the difference between an organisation just having a youth board, and then contrasting that to young people actually making real change and real impact?
I mean, I think there are a couple of differences that you would consider when trying to set them up and see what's appropriate. I think for us, our youth advisory board is a space for young people to talk amongst each other. That helps capacity building, that helps build confidence, that helps, as I think both of them have said, this diversity of approach, but also it creates an environment where that collaboration or that contribution is welcome. When you have young people in an adult board, or the official sort of trustee board, you could very easily have them sitting quietly. You could very easily have them only speaking on matters when it comes to young people, and that comes down to how much capacity building confidence you've got and how well you've hired in terms of the ability to speak on other matters, how much you've inducted them to make sure that they're kind of aware of what's going on, or they've got access to, I don't know, mentoring or support or advice on papers as you go through. But really importantly, and Jess was obviously at the vanguard of this, is paying for their time. So it can't just be, I will pay for your tube fare, or a stipend over a series of years. It's actually, I value your time. I pay you per hour that you give to me. And that hour is paid appropriately, a living wage, etc. So if you are serious about youth representation in governance, whether it be a youth board or youth attendance of a formal board, you kind of need to remember all those different elements, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And also, I want to tap into your personal experience, because sometimes as young people, we might think, oh, I'm here with like the official people on the board, like why am I here? How did I get here?
Imposter
What's
syndrome.
yeah. So what's been your experience? Were you guys shy at your first meeting? What's it like being in those spaces?
I think it's very surreal. I think it can be like, just to be honest, it can be quite daunting. It can be quite like, oh my gosh, you have all these people who is the CEO of this and the, oh, I actually did HR for how many years and etc. And it can be quite daunting. But I think that's what you need sometimes. You need to be thrown out into that deep end to then learn how to like swim. And the fact is, when you are thrown out, there's people there with like, a boat, like lifeguards. Exactly. There's people there to support you. So I found that my time at the board, like, even though I was like, okay, I'm coming into like this really executive space when I haven't been in that like prior, everybody was just so like welcoming and like very like kind and nice. Like, I think the most like meaningful conversations I would have is like when we're like going to get a tea or coffee and somebody's like really speaking to me about, like how I'm doing at uni or like my future career aspects, or giving me advice, trying to link me up with their son who's also in that like industry. I feel like you find that from like a lot of board members. They generally just see you as another board member. They're happy to network with you. They're happy to support you, and they actually value your role as a young person on the board. Like, I would even say like young, like they just value your role as a person, like, period. And that really helps with things like imposter syndrome. And I would also say like even like following board meetings, we have like post catch-ups with like our chair. We like I've like had calls with Michael where like me and him have spoken about like even like my progress, how I feel. And there's always that open door, like, it's okay, you can go and talk to Michael and say, Michael, I was a bit nervous. How did I do? Like, give me some tips. And Michael has told me, okay, Rachel, this is what you can improve on, but this is what you're also doing really good. So it's like you have that open space to express yourself, improve. And I feel like that's what it's all about as a young person, trying to like, strive and grow and
Yeah, and I agree with Rachel that I've always felt valued equally, like as another trustee, effectively, and I've never felt necessarily like a young person in those rooms. And I think the more you're in board spaces, the more you realise that there's so much value not only in bringing expertise, but just in sort of questioning and challenging and like adding new insights and perspectives wherever that comes from. So to some extent, it doesn't matter that you're a young person, because you're still just as capable as anyone else to ask those sort of like really key questions, to read the papers, to dig into the information. But what I would say is that that's not something that necessarily comes automatically as an organisation. Like, you can't just bring a young person into those spaces and then expect them to feel included and welcomed and on sort of equal standing as the rest of the board. That's something that NCS has really sort of like worked hard on and really embedded into its culture, making sure that senior leaders really value young people in those spaces. So for example, we have a youth shadow panel as part of our like trustee appointments. So right from the get-go, right from when people are joining our board, we're really signalling young people are critical to our organisation and we value them, and we specifically value them in decision making. They are a part of even deciding whether you get this role. Therefore, when you come into the board, we have an expectation that you are treating them as equals and that you're really valuing their perspectives. And I think that, as Rachel mentioned, sort of our chair and our CEO do like play a really important role in really making sure that the young trustees or the young people on the board are feeling included, and that they're well supported to engage, and that there's sort of transparency in being able to give feedback, ask questions, and that goes both ways.
Yeah.
I think also, just to say, like, it's changed quite a lot. It wasn't always like that at NCS either. So from my personal experience, I started NCS 5 years ago. I was the maternity leave cover for the company secretary. So I managed the board, basically. My very second week was they were hiring a new CEO. And so I sort of chaperoned candidates from the front door upper lift to the youth panel and to the other panel. There was one board member running that youth panel, and then otherwise it was sort of a group of stakeholders for the other panel. So that first of all said, right, this is a different organization. You've got a youth panel for hiring a CEO. What a great idea. The input was definitely included in terms of the decision that was made. I then went to my first board meeting, and there was a group of young people stuck outside waiting for the board who were running late for their item, where they were going to come in and talk to a paper or tell a story. It ran so late that they didn't really have time, that then when they came in, they had about 5 minutes to be to sort of say what they want, no interaction, and they left the room. And they'd all traveled to come to that board meeting. And I remember thinking, it doesn't feel very inclusive or very valuing of their time. And also, like, for everybody else, it felt a bit rude and was like, oh, that wasn't really how we want it to be. Come to now, we have board on Monday. I know that we have the very first item after the sort of the beginning of it will be this youth spotlight. I know that we've got people there to actually sort of interact, that there is always an item, that there is always a chance to ask, you know, incisive questions, to challenge, etc. That evolution over time, that's 5 years it took us.
Wow.
So it's not immediate. It needs to be purposeful. Even when you start with the design of, yes, we'll have youth shadow panels, that doesn't mean that it has gone into the behavior of the board and other parts as well.
Yeah, that's so key because just speaking to organizations that are looking to do youth governance, what can you say? Obviously, you said it took like 5 years for that evolution to happen. What can you say to those organizations to kind of like not warn them, not like flash signs like don't do this, but like encouraging them to do this? What are like the barriers that you guys face, and how will they overcome over that?
You need to you need to commit properly. So you need to really want it.
Okay.
And it has helped. I think my predecessor Mark was really, really passionate and thought it was really, really important. And our current chair also, and our previous chair also agreed. So when you have the leaders agreeing this is important, that's number one hurdle. If they don't, or if they don't really believe it, or they don't get it, then I think what you end up rolling out is tokenistic or sort of surface level or visceral.
Yeah.
So you have to have a commitment. I do think, like I said before, you need to not see it as free. Like it's not just, you know, well, young people, they'll give of their time, they'll come and tell us we're giving them experience. Okay, great. But actually you should be paying for their time. You should be valuing them.
Yeah.
And like I said, I do think you need to kind of set it up properly. So if you're committed and you're going to pay for it and you make sure everybody is inducted, introduced, has a good scope to their role, very clear about when they get involved, where they're welcome, where they maybe not get involved and why they're not. And you then sort of get that through every layer of the organization, which I don't think we did yet and won't do now because we're being shut down. But that was an area that we still needed to work on. That's much harder, you know, creating culture. But I think if you have those things to begin with, I think that's a good start. But I'm sure there are other things that people would add.
Yeah, I would definitely say like tracking. So feedback loops are very, very important. Knowing that they're not just coming and telling information and it's getting lost in the ether, whatever Zoom, Google Meet meeting. There's actually the Youth Advisory Board said this, or this group of young people said this, and we did this, or also we didn't do this, and why. Just having that feedback loop, because I think a lot of the time what happens is there's really, and I see at all these events, there's really, really meaningful discussions, and then there's just no follow-up, there's no actions, there's no, okay, so after the meeting, you're going to action this, you're going to take it to this team, and that team's then going to carry it out. There's none of that. And then even if it is carried out, the young people don't actually know. So let's say that there's actually something really good that you carried out. You don't go back to the same very young people and say, oh, this is what we did. And there's also this element of, I guess, only going to young people at the beginning or at the end. Like you have to involve young people throughout that whole process. Even though they're an advisory board and they're given advice, there should be that co-creation aspect, that you're not just presenting them something to analyze. They're the ones creating it in the room. They're the ones saying, oh no. I think, and that would even help in terms of like, in terms of them giving advice, because like if they're the ones that's already created it, then they wouldn't need to give advice to start with because they've already been in that process. So I feel like, yeah, that feedback loop is very, very important. Yeah, having this like tracked minutes of meetings and where it's going to end up in, and that will actually help with barriers in terms of youth engagement, because you're not just engaging, you're carrying out what they've said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think related to what Rachel was saying, you need to make sure that in the design of your structure, you're going to consult young people when there's real scope for change. So you don't have a board that you come to like ad hoc when you want them to like sign something off, or you just want to consult them like a focus group. Actually, you're like evaluating your entire governance structure and thinking, is there a young person at all the critical decision making points, or do we have some sort of check in place to make sure that actually work isn't being completed, contracts aren't being signed prior to at least asking ourselves, is this an appropriate time to be engaging young people? Should we be doing this? Could we be doing this? I think in that design of the structure, you really need to make sure that young people are involved in that design, like sort of co-create with young people right from the very start. And you have to accept that those young people might not be like the most representative group. They might not be the people that you ultimately want to engage. But at the beginning, getting some young people involved is better than adults designing a structure and then slotting young people into it. So work with what you've got at the beginning and use them to help design a wider structure that can hopefully enable you to engage a wider range of young people, and also to make sure that those young people are engaged at all the right places. And then I think the final thing related to that is making sure that you've really got like a learning culture in place, that actually you're not expecting to go into this and design the world's perfect youth governance structure, that actually you're getting started, you're trying it, you're evaluating it, you're iterating it consistently, and that you're sort of committed to doing that. And you can't expect to go in and achieve sort of perfection first time round. As Michael said, it took us sort of 5 years of evolution, and it wasn't like we started with one thing and 5 years later we changed it. Over that period of time, we sort of gradually got better and better. So I think really not letting like striving for perfection stop you from getting started. And sometimes people put up barriers that, although they're really valid conversations, shouldn't be a barrier, should be something that comes further down on your roadmap.
Yeah, it's about becoming more representative, not being representative.
From the get-go,
because I don't,
yeah.
well, but also I don't think you ever are.
Sure.
Because there's so much kind of diversity. And as we always talk about in NCS, we shouldn't call it youth voice. It's youth voices. There never is just one. There's no such thing as all youth believe, or even being truly representative. So as long as you see it as continuous, we become more representative, and you allow for a plethora or diversity within it. I think that's right. And yeah, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. That's a real way of operating for everything, not just youth governance.
Facts. I just want to flip it on the other side. So we're saying that obviously you can't necessarily be representative from the get-go. Like you have to basically be open to like becoming more representative over time. Just to flip it on the other side, for those young people who are quote unquote hard to reach, or the young people that will be like, oh, a youth board, like I don't see myself being there. What are some of those barriers for those young people? I'm going to go to you, Rachel. What are some of those barriers for the young people that are like, a youth board is not for me? Like why may they have that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's just like not feeling that their voice matters. I feel like if you've lived your life silenced, like when you've spoken, even when you've spoken, you haven't been listened to, it's very easy to think my voice doesn't matter. Nobody wants to kind of like listen to me. Even when you're looking at kind of like media or government, if you're not seeing yourself represented, you're gonna like, it's unconscious as well. You just like start to think, well, if I'm not in those spaces, if I can't see people who look like me in those spaces, then I can't actually reach those spaces. So it can be quite difficult. And that's why things like kind of like mentoring, or even like the support that we give in our application process for NCS is really important. And the application process was co-designed with young people. Things like not just kind of like going out on LinkedIn, using our organizations who are kind of like youth clubs, go into the spaces where these young people are. That's why it's really important, because they're not gonna, I don't know, even things like LinkedIn, like some young people don't have access to LinkedIn, or don't even know what that is. Like they're not, like, it's a privilege to know what LinkedIn is. It's a privilege to use that. So it's important to go to the spaces where young people are. And one thing while Jess was speaking that I really like, I'm really kind of like I'm grateful to NCS for, is how our role allows us to go to these young people as well. It's not just like we're sending out something, or we don't actually have personal connections. We're allowed as young people to speak to those young people who might feel like their voices are small, and show them like, I thought the same thing, but look, I'm here now talking to you. And it's very powerful, not just when I was talking about kind of like seeing people in government, but when you see other young people doing things that like you wish that you could do as well. I've spoken to like, oh, I love this job, because I've spoken to such great young people like over the course of this year. And it's just been so great to like just see our differences or similarities, but then we all have that youth voice that we're trying to like put to the table. And I think I've just made some like meaningful connections that can counter that kind of like representation problem.
And I also think practically, like there are lots of reasons why young people find it difficult to engage in these spaces. Like they're often meetings post-COVID in person on a weekday. And if you have a job, or you're at university or an apprenticeship, or you're at school, like how can you sort of justify, particularly when lots of these positions sadly aren't paid across the youth sector particularly, how can you justify sort of taking time out from your existing commitments to be able to go? So you're asking young people to really choose between like potentially work that is supporting them and their family and being involved in these sorts of opportunities. And often the work that young people are engaged in isn't the kind of thing where it's quite easy to just book whatever time off whenever you want. So there are lots of practical barriers, I think, to engaging.
And I think you've both spoken about the importance of meeting young people where they are versus having a shiny studio space and you're like, come to us, and it's like they can't afford the transport, they need help, they need to ask for permission to, either it's a weekday like you're saying. I'm going to go to you, Michael. How can organizations break down those barriers for young people, and how can organizations meet young people where they are?
I think there's a couple of things. So one is about showing, I guess, the importance of or value of that you see in Youth Voice. So one is around having role models. So seeing people that look like me or that are like me who are being, who are in a role. Now that's once you're existing is how you can do it. That's maybe not how you start. I think Rachel talked about sort of feedback loops, knowing, what's in it for me, why bother be a part of it if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to do anything. So showing kind of, you said we did moments, showing that it's tangible, showing even if you haven't done anything, how you plan to do it. This is how we sort of set up the structure. Value their time, like I've said before, so pay for it, make sure it shows that something that you think is important and therefore their role would be important. And I think probably just set the vision really clearly, make it a compelling one. One, as you say, that reaches out as well as it attracts. And then just keep checking, is it working? If it's not working, how do we refine it? Continuous improvement is the only way that you'll, not die a death, I guess. You continue to sort of evolve.
Yeah.
I would also say giving them resources to thrive as well. Like we're saying, you're getting people from like a representative background, and just touching it earlier, you're taking them and they might not actually be prepared to be in these spaces, but that doesn't mean that you don't give them a chance, etc. There's like coaching, mentoring. We did a lot of confidence building with our youth advisory board, and it was in those confident building sessions that we found a lot of them still felt like, even though they were there at the table, still felt like, oh, my voice doesn't matter, I actually have imposter syndrome, etc. So it's what training can you do, like repeatedly, what mentoring can you put in place to actually build that confidence, not just like, we're going to get young people from like an underrepresented background and then you're not actually giving them the tools that they need to thrive. Like that can be very harmful. Like I want to be the change I want to see in the world. I don't want like what's happened to me to like silence my voice. I really want to take that power back, and NCS really empowered me to do that. You have these moments in life where you can feel like a turning point, and that was definitely a turning point for me. Like even like preparing for the interview, like doing the interview, like you guys, like even doing that, I felt like my confidence being kind of like built back up through NCS. They've shaped me, they've grown me into who I am now. Now even going on to like corporate space and etc., I feel way more confident because of what NCS has done for me. And like that was at a point where I was at probably lowest of lows, guys, for being honest. And they've really kind of like built me up. So I feel like, you think about NCS as like a summer residential, as like the different things there, but they're actually building young people through their youth voice and through their youth governance that they do, which is amazing.
And I think paying young people has allowed us to, going back to our conversation previously, engage a wider variety of young people, increase the diversity of voices that are in our organisation, and also demonstrate just how much we value young people. Like we value them so much that we're willing to actually invest money into this project, and that in itself gives the organisation credibility as a youth organisation. It gives us the ability to go out to the sector and really talk with confidence about what we're doing and how much we value youth.
Yeah. So just to wrap up this conversation, I'm going to ask you guys to give a word of advice to other organizations. So NCS is a youth organization. However, there are other organizations, I think Jess, you mentioned, that aren't in the youth sector per se. So what advice would you give to them about youth governance? Like if they were to go and pursue this, what advice would you give to them?
I think only do it if you really want to. Don't do it just for the sake of it. I think especially given what's currently happening in this world, you need to really make proper change, not just lip service, because it can be changed at any point. It can be reversed. Once you sort of bake it in, I think then you have a chance of it actually bringing the benefit that you want. I think be really clear why you want to do it when you know you want to do it. So if you're not a youth sector organization, like we said, I mean, this is your future market. Young people are, it's a very glib term, but the future, like if you want to think about, if you're a product manufacturer, if you're a service organization, like we said, I don't think there's anyone that can say we don't actually care about what young people think. Or if you do, then you're obviously cutting yourself out and waiting for them to be older to then care about what they think. I think as we talked about, think about building capacity when you do it. Make sure that you worry about both relationships and structure. Make sure you pay for their time, and just keep checking in, keep evolving. It's never done.
It's never done. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
so true.
Yeah. I would definitely say have a way to measure impact, to make sure there's that feedback loop there, there's metrics, there's things that you can actually say, okay, we're doing youth voice, but this is how it looks like across the organization. It's not just in that kind of like youth advisory group. It's like all kind of like employees and different groups like that. And then I would also say, like, don't be afraid to like do things wrong, but just going, if you have done something wrong, having that improvement mindset. You're not always going to get it right, but it's from going to those young people and asking them, okay, how can we do better? That's how you change. So I say, don't be afraid to get things wrong. It happens.
Yeah, and I would say, I think I touched on this before, but really make sure that you're engaging young people like in spaces and at times where you can make change. There's no point in introducing a youth advisory board that sort of sits off in the corner, and then actually they give some input that's maybe taken on board, but ultimately the exec and the board go away and make the final decisions. Like, actually, you need to make sure that you create a mechanism whereby young people themselves can hold you accountable for the decisions that you're making. And like, I suppose it goes hand in hand with that, but being really like transparent with young people. That actually, I think some organisations, particularly who don't like regularly work with young people, are a bit apprehensive to involve young people in case they can't do what the young people are suggesting. No young person is expecting that every single one of their ideas is going to be taken on board. But so long as you value them and you are including them within those decision-making spaces, then you can have those really transparent conversations where you're like, okay, that was a great idea. We know that it's supported by evidence from our youth advisory board or from research. We just don't have the budget. I think it can be really discouraging for young people to give feedback in sort of a separate space and then later find out via the grapevine that it didn't happen. So I think the two things really go hand in hand. You need to make sure that young people are in the actual decision-making spaces. They're not just feeding in insights, because that allows you to have that transparency of decision-making. And it means that young people understand where their voice is going, when it works and when it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think if you think about that transparency or that honesty, the accountability in terms of how you communicate, when you think about it psychologically, you're describing an adult-to-adult relationship. So despite young people, you don't want to have a parent-child. So it's not paternalistic. It's not, oh, they might not cope with bad news, etc. It must be set up as an adult-to-adult. Otherwise, you don't have, where we've already started this whole conversation, people feeling like equals, being treated the same, being included. They feel othered.
So true. So insightful, guys. Thank you so much. This conversation has been, I've learned a lot myself as a young person. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.